As you can see, this orchid, all the blossoms have fallen off, they've completed their cycle, and now it's time to repot this orchid. With so many different materials on the market, it's hard to just choose one that will benefit your orchid. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the different potting mediums and how to, quick tip, media is plural, medium is singular. And I can never get that right, so I'm going to change this throughout the video. I'm not going to just ignore it. But just so you know, media is plural, medium is singular. So there are different kinds of potting media out there to pot your orchid in. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to choose the one that's correct for your environment. It doesn't matter what I grow mine in. It matters what you can grow yours in, because your routine is different, your conditions are different, and you need to find one that works for you. Hi, I'm Amanda Matthews, and thank you so much for watching this video at Orchideria, where you learn how to cultivate orchids and craft terrariums. So here's my orchid, and let's get into what's the best potting media for him. The first thing you need to focus on is fixation. Those roots need to fix onto something and hold onto something. If you plant an orchid in the pot and it's wobbly inside the pot and the roots are hitting against each other, that orchid root is going to, because it's very sensitive, it's going to die and shrivel up. And so you're going to lose that root. So it needs to be something that provides stability. The roots want to attach to something. They want to hold on to something. So inside your potting media, make sure you have something that is coarse enough that the roots can attach to. That's why it's a great idea to use lava rock or river rock or even gravel. Big hunks of charcoal also do the trick. And in this case, they would be this size and not the smaller size. So anything that is coarse that the roots can hold on to or attach to will provide fixation inside your pot. The second thing is humidity. You want to provide a good humidity without oversaturating that pot. When you water, you want that water to flow through the pot and exit quickly. So you don't want something that's compacted inside that pot. For example, sphagnum moss is excellent because it's so airy and it can provide good airflow through the pot. But most people get sphagnum moss and they really compact it. Oh, this is wet. It's dripping all over. So they compact it down inside that pot. Look how much I compacted that. Now it's like 1/3 of the size it was. Now there is no airflow inside this part. That's what's going to hurt your orchid. You want whatever potting media you use to provide airflow. Remember, in nature, orchid roots will grow attached to trees, 70% of them. The other 30% will grow attached to rocks, or they are semi-terrestrial, where they're attached to the top layers of leaf litter and moss. So the orchid roots will be exposed to air. That's what they like. That's what they're used to. They need that air to be really healthy. Now, it doesn't matter if you get a wonderful potting media and pot it in a cup like this, because the air cannot get in there. So you're practically using an excellent potting media, but you're suffocating your orchid. What you need is a good pot. For example, this pot only has aeration at the bottom. There are some orchids that will do well if you pot this with enough air inside the pot so it can travel. The best pot I've found is one that has not micro, but slots on the side, holes on the side, and an excellent drainage on the bottom. As you can see, I will leave these linked below if you want to find them. So this is a good example of a decent orchid pot. So we've talked about fixation, we've talked about humidity. The third one is light. You want a medium that is going to provide that right light access to the roots, because orchid roots also photosynthesize. That's why, for example, in this pot, those roots are probably going to be not green, but they still can be healthy. It's just not providing the most that I can give for my orchid. The best would be if I actually drilled huge holes around this pot so that light can go through here. Since it's thriving and this is a test, so far it stays. So that's what I mean. You have to test your environment and see what works for you. Temperature. When it comes to temperature, we hardly ever think about this as a potting media. But imagine you're growing your orchids hydroponically or just in water. That glass will allow air because there's plenty of air around the pot. It will provide light, but it will provide humidity because the water will evaporate and hit the walls of the glass and then fall back down. But it won't provide the correct temperature, especially during winter. So if your orchids are inside in hydroponics in a thin glass vase, you need to actually put them under a heating pad to keep them warm. The orchid roots do not like to go lower than a certain degree. Also, a terracotta pot like this one or a clay pot, it will keep that orchid cooler a few degrees only, but it can make a difference. So if your orchid is very sensitive to temperature change, you might want to stay away from potting. Whatever potting media you use, stay away from the terracotta pot or provide a heating pad underneath it again. So make sure that your temperature is correct. You can work around these things. It's not that, oh, I've got a cold environment, I'm not going to grow orchids. Don't do that. There's always a way out, and there's always resources to find the best potting media for you. The next one is air circulation. Now, I've talked about this a little bit already, but you cannot have an orchid that is compacted in that pot. That's why we don't use potting soil or normal soil. You want a potting media that will allow air to come in and out freely. So whatever you use, do not compact it down in that pot. Another thing we don't think about when we talk about air circulation is like orchid bark, like this right here. There are grades of orchid bark. There's fine grade and there's coarse grade orchid bark. Now, don't go by brands, go by what works for you. But I will show you, for example, this potting mix. It says coarse blend on the bag. But that's what it looks like. And there you have to really sift it out because there's a lot of dust. Here's another brand, and I like them more. Their blend is a little bit coarser. It's bigger, so it can, and it already has charcoal and perlite in it, so it is a mixture. It doesn't have sphagnum, but you can always add that. So if you have very, very fine roots or a small seedling orchid, it will need a finer grade orchid bark. If it is a bigger established orchid like a phalaenopsis or even a cattleya that has really thick roots, you'll need thicker, larger grades of orchid bark. Another potting media that is not so common but extremely excellent inside your orchid pot is styrofoam peanuts, and I'll be talking about that in a later video too. But if you want to know it now, head over to orchideria.com and look under potting media, and you can see the benefits and the cons, the pros and the cons of using styrofoam peanuts. The last thing that you need to think about when you're selecting a potting media is the retention of nutrients. So if I use river rock or lava rock or even gravel, which is perfectly fine, but I have to remember that I'm going to water this. The water is going to hit on this and exit quickly. As you can see, there are lots of air holes in here, so it's going to be very airy, which is perfect for the orchid. But the retention of water and nutrients is not that much. So if I use only this, I will need to water a little more, and I will need to fertilize a little more. If I use sphagnum moss, which is the total opposite, it will retain humidity for an incredible amount of time, and it will release this humidity slowly. The same with nutrients. So I will have to water less and fertilize less. Now, how do I actually put all this together and make a good potting media? Well, I can experiment with these things. I can mix and match and see what works best with my environment. The things you want to avoid are using mulch in the place of orchid bark. Mulch is made so that it will degrade quickly. It's for like one season only, and it's to protect that top grass that's just coming out of winter and into the spring, so that those little fine grades of grass or whatever flowers you're growing outside will not freeze. But it's made so that in spring, all that mulch will degrade and the grass will be nice and healthy. So mulch inside your potting media will do horrors to your orchid roots. Stay away from mulch. Another thing that many people tried is hydrogel beads, because even though they are pretty, I mean, they're little like gel beads that expand with water, and then when they get too dry, they shrink up, and that's exactly why you cannot use them as a potting media. Because remember the fixation and the stability I talked about on the number 1 point? Well, that's what happens. The hydrogel beads will, when you put water in there, they will expand and the roots will move. And when they get dry, they will shrink up and the roots will move again. So these roots are going to be expanding and moving along with the hydrogel beads, which does not provide any fixation whatsoever. They all have pros and cons. One thing about cocoa fiber, for example, it is usually very salty because coconuts grow near oceans. In Brazil, at least, they had these huge oceans with the coconut trees, just beautiful, beautiful scenery. And because of the humidity that was always present, they also had a high grade of salt that came from the humid waters from the ocean. So their salt buildup will be a little higher than other media. Another one, leca pebbles do have a tendency to also absorb higher quantities of salt, and you'll see a white buildup on, especially if you use tap water, that the salt buildup, the salt residue, is going to form a crystallized covering on top of your leca. So each one has their positive sides and their negative sides. You have to experiment with each one and see what works in your environment. If this video did provide any quality for you or increased your knowledge in orchid care, please give it a like, because that helps me know what videos to do more of in the future or what videos to stay away from. So what I need to do right now is to find a potting media that will work on fixation of the roots, on adequate airflow, on retaining humidity, on retaining nutrients, on having the right light, and providing a good temperature for my orchid. Now that seems like a lot, and I know it is. The good thing about orchid care is that we can always test out new ideas, test out new things, and see what works, and write it down in a journal. That's why I'm working on a orchid journal. It's like a diary or a tracker or a personal record, like a planner, where you can write down what orchid is potted in what, when it rebloomed, how long it stayed in bloom. And I'm really excited about it because I've looked for something like this on the market and I couldn't find it. But it's still in experimentation phase. I'm still planning out what's the best layout, what are the best items to be writing down. So if you can help me out, I would really appreciate it. If you want a orchid journal, write in the comments below. I'm going to send them out to the first 5 people, because of course cost, that do answer me. I just would like some feedback of, hey, I think this could be better. I think this page could be inverted. I think it's too much information or not enough, or just any idea that can really help you make a good tracker for the future. So the first 5 people who do comment, I want a tracker, I will send it to you. I will get in touch, of course, privately to get your address. If you are not one of the 5, if you saw this video later on, you still please comment. And I think this information could be in it, this other information could be there. Looking forward to that. And continue watching, because the next couple of videos I'm going to do one on orchid bark, one on sphagnum moss, one on coconut fiber, every kind of potting media that's out there. So stay tuned and hit that notification bell to know when new videos are out. The very next video is about sphagnum moss and how it works as a potting media, how much to use, where it comes from, and all those interesting things. And this video down here is something else. And all, thank you for watching this video and happy cultivating.